You're listening to the Nourish CEO podcast, and this is my brand new series on the 4 CEO types, how to build a business that fits who you actually are. This is one of 4 episodes that deep dive into each CEO type to help you understand your wiring, leverage your strengths, avoid your blind spots, and build a business that works with your true nature instead of against it. Here's the reality of the business coaching landscape right now. Almost everything you see is built for one of 2 types of operators. One is the bold, fast-moving, decisive person who can make a call and execute without looking back. And the second is the highly relational, magnetic personality who can grow a massive audience just on the strength of who they are and convert it through sheer warmth and connection. Now, if you're one of those 2 types, a lot of the advice out there probably will work reasonably well for you. But here's what no one's talking about. Those are not the only 2 ways to lead a business. Even more than that, the current obsession with hype-first marketing, meaning build a big audience, go viral, be everywhere all at once, perform your personality at scale, dangle the carrot in front of people, and don't worry about actually delivering anything on the back end. All of that is actively working against a huge portion of experts who are genuinely excellent at what they do, but they're not wired to build a business that way, and they really don't want to. So if you're more methodical, if you lead through depth and rigor rather than speed and charisma, if you build trust slowly, but your clients stay for years because you build that trust, the mainstream advice wasn't built for you. And trying to implement it anyway is probably costing you way more than just time and energy in your business. Now, this is what this series is designed to fix. The 4 CEO types framework will map your natural leadership style, how you decide, how you build trust, how you sell, and even how you deliver your programs, and helps you build your business strategy around that. It's not as a workaround for not being the right type of CEO. It's building your business with your genuine competitive advantages at the forefront. Now, if you haven't taken the CEO type quiz yet, it's linked in the show notes, or you can go to lauraschoenfeld.com/quiz. And I recommend that you take it before you listen to these series episodes or take it after. Either works, but I want to make sure that you know exactly the type that is most aligned for you. And if you're already in the middle of the series, welcome back. Let's get into it. We're on part 4 of the 4-part series on the 4 CEO types, how to build a business that fits who you actually are. This is the final episode, and today we're covering the strategic CEO. So if this is your type, I want you to hear this up front. Your depth and your intelligence is rare and genuinely valuable. But tell me if this sounds familiar. You don't do surface level. While everyone else out there is sharing oversimplified advice and quick fix promises, you're the one who actually thinks it all through. You see the nuances and you build frameworks that account for complexity. And you've supported the most complex cases that most other people don't even know exist. But here's the uncomfortable truth that you've probably already noticed. Your brilliance doesn't actually count if no one ever gets to experience it. And maybe you've noticed that your best ideas are still sitting in development. You're refining, researching, making sure it's all comprehensive, while other people with half your expertise are out there actually launching and making money. Or maybe you are putting it out there, but people aren't biting like you thought they would because they just don't seem to get the value of what you have to offer. Today, we're going to talk about how to get your strategic depth out of your head and into the world without dumbing it down and without waiting until it's perfect. Let's start by identifying what makes a strategic CEO. So the core wiring of the strategic CEO is that you are task-oriented and more slow-paced. Slow-paced does not mean slow thinking. It just means you make decisions and you take action in a very intentional way. So the way that strategic CEOs show up in business is that they tend to think systematically and comprehensively. You are really great at keeping things organized and making sure that things are done in the right sequence, in the right order. If you've been in business for a longer period of time, maybe you have a lot of standard operating procedures that you've developed because the way things are done and being meticulous about that is really important to you. Within your programs, you build thorough frameworks that actually work. You actually think about how are you going to teach this so that people get what they need to understand, that they really understand the full depth of the topic, and that they can take action on what you're teaching in the most effective way possible. So you are super research oriented. You want to make sure that the things that you're putting out there are accurate as much as you possibly can. And you also know that there's a ton of nuance. If you are somebody, especially in like the health and wellness space or the financial space, where there is a lot of maybe type of responses to things, you really see that depth, that nuance, that complexity. And it's usually what other people are missing. So your ability to go beyond the surface, to really dig into things, means that you're able to help people in a way that a lot of other people can't or won't because they don't go deep enough. You're the kind of person that if you have a client come to you with a complicated situation, a more rare diagnosis, something that's going on where other people have told them it's out of their, out of their scope of practice or their expertise to be able to solve the problem. A lot of times they're coming to you because you are the person who will dig in and really go deep with them. So that can be incredibly attractive and very supportive to ideal clients, especially ones who have been dismissed or told, oh, everything's fine, you're just, stressed or something like that, right? You also tend to research deeply before making decisions. So that can be decisions on the best way to grow your business. It can be decisions on how to serve your clients the best way. It can even be things as simple as pricing. You're doing all the research you possibly can to help you ideally make the best possible decision. And so when I talk about the strategic CEO being more slow paced with their movements, with their decisions, again, it's not because you're not a fast thinker. You probably are actually a very fast thinker. There's probably a lot of thoughts going in your head at any given moment, but you want to see the full picture. And so that takes time. You don't make snap decisions. You don't necessarily just trust your gut about things. You really do want to see the full picture and get all the pertinent information before you synthesize that to make a decision. Now, you're also really great at explaining the why behind things. So a lot of people really just stay at that surface level of do this, don't do this. But you're really able to go deep into the thought process behind your recommendations. You're able to explain why you've made that recommendation. Now, that doesn't mean people always understand what you're saying, but you don't make statements lightly. You don't just say things because it's popular or because it gets eyeballs. Like, you've thought through everything that you share at a really deep level. And if somebody asked you to go deeper on why you think that or why you share that, you could talk for hours, right? So there's a lot of depth in your knowledge, in the content that you put out there. You're like a long form person. You really like to have space and time to share your expertise and to go to the level of depth that you feel is required for the person to understand what you're sharing, why you're sharing it, why it's valuable, all of that good stuff. So the way that you approach your business is genuinely valuable, even though sometimes it might feel like you hold yourself back or that, other people are moving faster than you. There's a ton of value that you bring to the table that I really encourage you to actually acknowledge and celebrate. You might not be the kind of person that celebrates the things that you do or gives yourself some credit where credit is due, but I just really want you to walk away from this conversation today feeling good about what you have to offer. So a lot of times people that are showing up as experts online in whatever topic, right? Health, wealth, relationships, all the things. Basically, if you can teach somebody how to do something, you could potentially show up as an expert, right? But you probably know just as well as I do that a lot of the advice being given in a variety of topics online is oversimplified garbage. Oversimplified meaning that they have simplified things down to the point of actually being wrong, or they really just don't understand the depth of what they're talking about enough to even have complexity. So you understand that depth, you understand the nuance. And so you're able to see such a bigger picture than what a lot of other people are seeing because they don't even have the knowledge or the understanding that you do. Based on that knowledge and understanding, you're able to create solutions that actually account for reality. Again, I think a lot of times when people oversimplify things and they make it sound really easy, they don't actually even think about what could get in the way of their clients being successful. And you're the kind of person who sees ahead to say, okay, what could go wrong? What do we need to account for? What are the potential problems that are going to come up? And you're not just throwing stuff out there willy-nilly to say, I don't know, it sounds like this will work, so just try it, right? You really think it through and you want to make sure you've considered all the different angles before you share something with a client. And that means that you're taking the client results really seriously. People appreciate that, especially people who are highly educated. They want to know that you're thinking about this as much or even more than they are. And they don't want to be working with somebody who feels like they're just guessing about stuff or they're just making these statements that don't really have anything to back it up. They want to work with somebody who can actually explain things when they want to go deeper. So those serious clients, the people who are willing to spend more money, who are really looking for someone who stands out because they aren't oversimplifying things, they are craving your depth. So you have the opportunity to work with people who a lot of times will spend more money, they'll stay with you longer, they will choose you because they can trust that you'll go deep with them. And even if someone else is making bigger promises or has a flashier website or, better marketing, branding, they'll still end up picking you because they can see through all that. They can see through all the smoke and mirrors, and they want somebody who is really, truly going into the weeds with them to uncover what's going on, what kind of problems need to be fixed, what's the best way to solve this problem, how do we make sure that this actually works for your daily life? Like that's what serious clients are looking for. So you do that naturally, which is amazing. It's something that just comes, I don't want to say easily because you definitely put time and energy into it, but it's not something you have to force yourself to do. Like you're the kind of person who would be reading PubMed articles at like 11 o'clock at night because you got really into a particular research study that you don't just went down the rabbit trail of, right? So if that sounds like you, then you're definitely a strategic CEO, and you're also able to build your intellectual property in a way that compounds over time. So if you think about your overall business as a collection of frameworks, as a collection of perspectives, methodologies, you can actually start to pull different pieces of your unique expertise and turn it into something that is a branded IP. So basically, like, what are you known for? What are your topics of expertise? How do you approach things? And that can actually compound over time in the sense that you begin to be known for something and people will actually seek you out because your frameworks, your methods are so unique. I can think of a couple people off the top of my head that I know who are super intelligent, brilliant people, brilliant practitioners and scientists and people who really go very deep in their knowledge around things. And they have built a business just almost because people know that they go so deep, but then also because they're able to really defend their intellectual position on the different areas of their work, their way of supporting people, and they're able to create really unique and advanced strategies for solving problems that a lot of times other CEO types can't. So I'm not personally a strategic CEO. I definitely move faster than the typical strategic CEO, do a little bit more of like the gut instinct kind of decision making, but I also very much appreciate the depth and rigor that strategic CEOs take to their work, their thoroughness. I know that, sometimes it can get a little frustrating if you're like, oh man, it takes me so long to do things. But there is some value there because you know that when you do something, you've thought it through and you're not just, like I said, kind of flippantly putting things out there and then having to fix it later because it wasn't done in a very effective way. But honestly, the people that I work with who are the strategic CEOs, they're just so smart. I know it's like, I'm going to keep saying how smart you are, but it is something where the kind of things that you guys get excited about, that you get passionate about, that you go really, really deep on, Most people do not have the intellectual stamina to do that. And I feel like so many of the really amazing innovations in the world today have come from the strategic CEO type thinkers who, yeah, they take a little longer to come up with stuff. But when they do come up with something and they put it out there, it's incredible. So hopefully, like I said, you're probably not the kind of person who acknowledges how brilliant you are on a regular basis, but I hope that this conversation is reminding you of how brilliant you are, because I do think that taking ownership of that is going to be super helpful for you in running your business effectively. Now, let's talk for a minute about what your natural money makers are as the strategic CEO. Because again, I think about, so many of the biggest companies out there have been created by people who are, extremely intelligent and created something that has lasted for decades. I mean, we think about things like Apple or Amazon or Microsoft, these companies that were started by these, I mean, whether you actually like these people or not, started by very, very intelligent people, and they have created something that really has defined the category that they're in, has defined even like American culture. I mean, we think about Apple and Amazon, like I use those tools literally all the time. Like I'm using a MacBook right now. I have my iPhone. Probably a bunch of the equipment that I'm using was ordered from Amazon. Like for better or worse, the people that are the strategic CEOs, when they are able to put their minds to something that is solving a big problem for a large number of people, they can become billionaires. So, like I said, sometimes it can feel like you're competing with people that are more flashy, more, marketing friendly. But ultimately, I really think most of the most financially wealthy entrepreneurs out there probably mostly fall under this strategic CEO category. They might be decisive in terms of the way that they take action faster, but honestly, I think a lot of these guys and women as well, but people who are in like the tech world and the medical world, things where it does require that depth of understanding and that rigorousness, they're able to create something that just explodes financially. So you as the strategic CEO, you're able to create services, programs, offers that genuinely work, and there aren't a bunch of gaps or missing pieces. Like you don't just slop stuff together and then say, I hope it works. Like you're very meticulous about the way that you create your services and design things and put things together. And it's always coming from the goal of helping people, which is awesome. You're also able to justify higher prices with clear, logical rationale. So you're not somebody who makes emotional decisions. You really do think through like the dollars and cents, the economics of the pricing. Now, that doesn't mean that you're always pricing appropriately. And sometimes that logic can mean you don't price as high as you could, but you don't have this like, oh my gosh, I can't charge that much because, such and such reason. Usually you've had a very clear decision-making process for why you're charging what you're charging, and you don't get all emotionally tied up in it. You're also great at attracting those high-paying premium clients who value depth and rigor and want somebody who's going to do a lot of the thinking for them. So don't underestimate this. This is something that I think it's really easy when you're not around a lot of people who think as deeply as you to not realize how valuable your thought process is. But like I said, people who are willing to spend a lot of money, a lot of times they're willing to spend money on someone who does the deep thinking for them. And not to say that they're not thinking about it, but they're paying you to be like a genius in their pocket, basically. So don't underestimate the way that you can charge for your services and speak to the person who really wants things to be done well, done right the first time, and also that they don't want to leave any stone unturned. You're also able to build assets and frameworks in your business that actually become assets. So it's not just regurgitating the things that other people are doing. You're looking at things in a collective, holistic way and then synthesizing these really incredible ways of solving problems for people. And then those themselves can become assets for your business. Again, it's, something where you're looking at stuff that nobody else is looking at. You're putting the pieces together. You're creating something that combines all of those pieces, whether it's a program or an app or a service. It's just something that you naturally think about, and you're able to create something that is really advanced, really innovative, and is something that is a huge asset to your business in the future. When it comes to your messaging and marketing, you also have the opportunity to stand out in a sea of shallow advice and also very tactical advice where it's just like, do this, don't do that. The whole like, get ready with me type of stuff, or follow me for a day of doing these things. That's not your style. You really go deep on the intellectual side of things, the explanations, the belief shifts, the helping people understand why they would be doing what they're doing. And so for the person who likes that, that's way more attractive than the people who are just giving these like super basic, here's how to do XYZ type of content. So now we'll talk in a minute about how that can become a little bit of a handicap for you as well, but it is an opportunity to stand out for your rigor and not just sound like everybody else who's just kind of saying the same thing. So once people find you and they can see that you look at things deeper, that you put things together that maybe other people aren't putting together, they can understand the value of what you do very quickly if you are able to explain it in a way that aligns with the results that they're looking for. So now let's talk for a few minutes about your blind spots. So if you've listened to other episodes, you'll know that every single CEO type has blind spots. None of us get away with having, perfectly clear 360-degree vision, right? We all have things that we don't pay attention to as much, that we don't do as seamlessly or as naturally. And so for you, the strategic CEO, a lot of times the problem that you run into is that you're so thoughtful about everything that thinking things through ends up becoming paralysis by analysis. And maybe that sounds familiar, right? Where you're like, I need to know more. I need to get more details. I need to understand this. I need to make sure this is logical. And we all know that life doesn't always work that way. It's not always a clear black and white answer. And so if you get into entrepreneurship, where a lot of times there are things you have to do without knowing if it's going to work or how it's going to work. And because you're such a deep thinker, you can end up stopping yourself from taking action because you just never actually get to a place where you feel like you have the answer, fully explained. So this can show up a few different ways. When you have a program or a product or a service, you might end up over-engineering it before you sell it. And ultimately, the only way to know if something actually works is by validating it with real clients. And maybe you know that conceptually, but there's a part of you that still hesitates to put yourself out there as fully as you could because you're just not sure, is this good enough? Is this the right thing to do? And you're not as willing to practice with real people before you actually have it all figured out. So I'm not saying that that's insurmountable. You can absolutely make a decision to make things good enough and not perfect, but that might be something that you notice that you're just like wanting everything to be 10 out of 10, exactly what it's supposed to be the first time you put it out, instead of going through an iterative process with real paying clients. You might also, whether it's with your services, your sales process, your marketing, you might end up spending days, weeks, or even months refining things instead of just putting it out there and testing it. So even with things like content or marketing strategies, you might be the kind of person who's like overthinking the content and like, oh, it has to be really good. And then it takes you a long time. And then something distracts you and you forget about it. And then you come back to it and then you have to think about it more. And by the time you've even put something out there, your competitors have already posted like 10 times, right? So you just spend potentially too much time thinking and refining instead of letting things be good enough and then using the actual launch process to test something. You might realize that you have brilliant ideas, but they end up sitting in development forever because they never feel fully ready, because you have some sort of arbitrary definition of what ready means. And if it doesn't hit that definition, you just let it sit in, whether it's your laptop or your phone or your brain even, where it's like, oh, that would be such a cool thing to do. But then it just sits there, right? And nobody ever gets to experience it. You never get to make any money from it because it's never ready. Now, when it comes to your way of operating with the people in your business, a lot of times you end up over accommodating requests because you can see different perspectives and you can understand why somebody might feel a certain way or ask for a certain thing. And you also are so smart and your knowledge is so broad. Like there's so many things you know about. You end up getting into scope creep because you're smart enough to figure out how to do different things, right? Somebody comes to you for a specific thing and then they're asking you questions. And it's like, well, I could set a boundary and say that's not my area of expertise, or I could go spend 3 hours researching it for them. And so maybe your tendency is because you are so smart and you can figure things out, you'll go off and research things. And you didn't have to do that. You didn't get paid for it, but you ended up accommodating these requests because you're capable, not because it was actually anything you would ever promise to do. In the sales process, sometimes what can happen is you can end up focusing too much on deliverables and nitty-gritty details that, yes, are logical reasons for why you've constructed your offer the way it is or the price point, but totally miss the emotional connection. That's usually what people are buying from. So as much as we like to think about people being logical buyers, and maybe you're a more logical buyer, right? Like this is possible that you're the kind of person that does do a lot more research and thinking through something before you make a purchasing decision. But the vast majority of people are emotional buyers. And if you're just looking at all the nitty-gritty deliverable details as being what they're paying for, people can feel less excited and driven to purchase because they almost have to like spend all this time to even absorb all the information that you've given them. And it makes them feel more confused in the sales process than clear. And again, clear does not mean that they're understanding everything that you do or that they're getting the depth of your brilliance. Clear just means that they can make a confident decision to move forward and they're not feeling like, I'm not sure what to do. So clarity can also be emotional clarity, right? Like they can just have that sense of like, this feels like the right thing to do, even though, I don't know all the details. And I'm not saying you need to hide the details, but you may have the tendency of over explaining during a sales conversation. And maybe it sounds really great on paper. And yes, you can justify all of the different deliverables and the cost, but people walk away feeling overwhelmed, not ready, and you might get a lot more people ghosting your sales conversations or having a lot of objections than someone who is, really tapping more into the emotional buying process. Another challenge that you can run into in your sales is that when you're sharing what you do, you present it more like, here's what I can do for you and here's the options you have, versus coming into a sales conversation as a leader and leading somebody to help them make a decision for themselves. So you kind of like present it more like, here's the options, what sounds good to you, versus saying, hey, based on what you told me, I think this is the best fit. This is how this is going to help you. Here's what we're going to do together. Are you ready to go, forward with this? So it's subtle. It doesn't have to be something where you're like getting them to cry on the phone or something, but the conversation should really be led and not just delivered, right? And I think sometimes the strategic CEO, you just see all of the details and you think the details are what makes this valuable. And then you share that and the details end up actually overwhelming people. So again, this is not every single person who is a strategic CEO, but you might notice, hey, some of these sound like me. I tend to sit on ideas for a long time. I take a really long time to launch something because I never feel like it's comprehensive enough. I feel like a lot of my time is spent thinking about things versus putting things out there. And even though that analysis feels productive because you're thinking so much, or maybe you're even working on things behind the scenes, but when it comes to actually shipping it and putting it in front of customers and taking payment for it, that's where you might find yourself hesitating. And as I mentioned before, your brilliance is really not meaningful if nobody's ever getting to experience it. And how do people experience your brilliance? By paying you for a service. So as somebody who is a deep thinker, sees all the angles, wants to make very comprehensive decisions, you can always see reasons to wait. You can always see reasons to delay. You can always see reasons to slow down. And you're not as good at talking yourself through that slowdown and getting yourself to a place where it's like, hey, it might not be totally ready, or I may not feel like it's perfect, but it's good enough, right? Like being able to get yourself to that good enough point can take a lot for you. And depending on your situation, depending on if you have a coach, depending on if you know, have the motivation, you may or may not get over that hump, right? You may be someone who could have gotten over the hump, but nobody was holding you accountable. You know, found reasons to avoid it versus having big motivation to do it anyway. And so that can be kind of your biggest blind spot, I would say. It's really something where your thinking is a double-edged sword, right? Like your brilliance is awesome in a lot of ways, and then it's also something that can slow you down if you're not paying attention, right? So I'm hoping that this episode today is really an opportunity to just notice if that stuff's happening, because you may not be as good at recognizing when you're overthinking things. This is something that I see a lot in my strategic CEOs, is that they will just overthink. And it's like they don't even know they're doing it because it's such a normal way of thinking and operating for them that they don't even realize it's happening until like I snap my fingers and like, hey, like, let's just make a decision. Let's move forward. You know, what do you actually need to do this? And so working with a coach, especially one like me, who's a decisive CEO who, yes, I see the depth, I see the nuance, I see the complexity, but I'm also like, let's take action. That can really help with getting out of this paralysis by analysis. And truly, in my mind, there's a big difference between strategic thinking versus strategic avoidance, right? So when you're thinking strategically, that creates exceptional work. You're brilliant. Your brilliance is impacting the world. You're, innovating your industry. Like there's a lot of really amazing stuff from that strategic thinking that's productive. And then there's the strategic avoidance where you're looking for all the reasons why something's not ready, why it's not going to work, what if this happens? And that actually ends up keeping your brilliance and your exceptional work from ever existing. And ultimately, if it doesn't exist, it's not helping people, right? And I know you want to help people. So in order to do that, as the strategic CEO, the most important thing to know is that you do not have to dumb down your work. You do not have to be someone who makes decisions flippantly. You don't need to be someone who just ignores concerns and puts it out there anyway. You just need to trust your strategic thinking enough to let people experience it before you think it's perfect. Because in reality, most people probably think it is perfect or it is amazing. And you're probably a lot more hard on yourself than the average client that you're going to work with would be. And really just giving yourself what's like the minimum viable decision-making information, or like, what does it have to be before you're ready to say yes? And how does that like compare to perfection, right? So if perfection's 10 out of 10, maybe ready is 7 out of 10. And really just making those decisions to prevent yourself from spinning in that analysis cycle. Because if you are expecting 10 out of 10 perfection when you're putting something out there, you'll probably never put it out there. And the reality is you're actually going to learn more from having even just one real client going through the process than you would learn from 6 months of development in your office, just like thinking about something, right? And so being able to actually work with real people, to put it out there, to let the process be iterative is something that is going to create an even better product and service for you than if you just think about it the whole time. So here's what this looks like in practice. In your offers, you have to launch before it's perfect because first of all, it never will be perfect. Second of all, it's going to get better by launching it and by using it with real people. You can then refine your offers based on real experience. So feedback from clients, what kind of results are they getting? The things that are actually real world evidence to say, does this work or does this need improvement? And as I said a minute ago, your imperfect is still better than most people's finished products. So don't be so hard on yourself. It's probably ready to go way sooner than you think it is. And that doesn't mean you can't improve it later as you take people through your process. When it comes to your messaging, taking a more clear stance and sharing your conclusions and not just sharing The analytical process is really important. So this means leading with the conclusion, leading with the answer, making a clear statement that can catch people's attention, that can even feel polarizing, and then adding the nuance later. So not trying to lead with nuance because nuance does not get attention. It doesn't mean that nuance is bad. It doesn't mean that you should be sensationalizing everything that you do. But it's more about the order of presentation. So putting the conclusion out, making the strong statement, saying what you believe first. And then if there needs to be nuance, there can be nuance added, but it's not the first thing somebody's seeing. In your sales process, making clear recommendations and leading somebody to choice instead of just presenting options and sharing deliverable details. People are paying you for your expertise, and part of that means your expertise in helping them make a decision and not just letting them make the decision for themselves without any input. They don't want you to be neutral. They don't want you to be like, I don't know, you could do it or you could not. Like, if you show up like that in a sales conversation, people are going to feel so unsupported versus coming in and saying, based on everything you've told me, here's my recommendation. Here's what I think we should do. How does that sound? Right? It's like, you're leading with the decision and the recommendation and then helping them feel confident about it versus just giving them a bunch of information and then letting them decide. As far as your boundaries are concerned, it's looking at how do you hold consistent standards, even if you can see logical exceptions to the rules that you've created. So, for example, if you have a no refunds policy and people are asking for refunds and giving you, 5 paragraphs about why they need the refund or why it makes sense to give the refund, being okay to just stick with your policies, right? And I'm not saying you have to be cold-hearted or something, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be an excuse, right? There will always be an excuse for somebody to not stick to your boundaries that have been, I'm sure, being the strategic CEO, you have very clearly defined those and explained them, but sticking to those can feel a little hard, especially if somebody gives you a logical reason to not stick with them. And so just making sure that you are confidently holding to your boundaries so that you're not letting people basically talk their way out of respecting the boundaries that you've created. So what this allows you to do in your business is that your ideas get out of your head and they create real impact in the world. You're actually helping people, not just thinking about how you could help people. Your clients, when they come to work with you, they feel guided, they feel led, they feel like they know what to do next instead of just knowing a bunch of information, right? Like a lot of times information is not what they're looking for. They're looking for direction. They're looking for clarity. They're looking for, do this, don't do that. And learning how to do that in a way that doesn't just trash your nuance is really important. Your reputation will grow primarily through results. So yeah, you're smart, but can you actually help people? And as you're building that just collection of case studies, results that you're getting for people will start to see you as somebody who is worth investing in and able to help facilitate a transformation and not just somebody who's super smart. There's tons of super smart people out there. That doesn't mean that they're good at helping people. And so the more you can focus on how do you make your work actually transform lives? Part of it's getting it out there. Part of it is simplifying things and not necessarily sharing all the nuance that exists because people just want to know what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And the more you can simplify it down to something that is very transformation focused, the more your business is going to grow. So for you, the strategic CEO, here's your game plan. When it comes to creating an offer, launch, then refine. So you're not going to try to hit perfection in isolation. You're not going to try to think about something to make it better. You're going to put it out there. You're going to run real people through it. You're going to collect the data you need to collect. You're going to make the refinements that you need to make, and you're going to let good enough be good enough. In your messaging, you're going to share conclusions. You're going to lead with the conclusions, lead with the information that you want people to know. And then the analysis or the nuance can come later, if at all, but you're not going to just share your thinking process without actually having a strong conclusion that you can share. You want to make sure that you're catching people's attention, you're getting their ears to perk up, maybe even getting some people to disagree with you, but you're not just putting out a bunch of information that's like nice to know, but not necessarily moving anybody. In your sales process, you're going to make recommendations, not just present options or overload people with all the details. You're really going to simplify things and help pair the things that are relevant to their unique situation and make a recommendation about how to move forward and really lead them into the sales process. In your schedule, you're going to protect time to think, but make sure you're also limiting the thinking time, right? So I actually think for you guys, putting time blocks in your calendar where it's just thinking time is great because, first of all, that means you're making space for it. And if you make space for it, it's not going to seep into the rest of your day. You're not going to be like, thinking about something at 11 o'clock at night when you're trying to sleep because you never gave yourself a chance to think about it during the week. So putting even just like a 1 or 2 hour block in your calendar for thinking time, so that way you are making time for it, but you're not just letting it be running in the background 24/7. Because if you don't have any constraints on your thinking time, you will just think about something until I don't even know. When do you stop thinking about things, right? So really putting some time boundaries around your thinking process, but also giving yourself intentional time to be letting your brain do its thing, which is, again, that's your brilliance. But if it's not contained or not boundaried, it does not necessarily have the same impact. And speaking of impact, in your vision, you want to be building your schedule, your work strategy, your offers, your messaging, all the things that are required for a business to be successful. You want to build it for impact, not just intellectual elegance. Something being really deep and detailed and impressive does not necessarily create the impact that you could be creating if you simplified things. You thought about, how do you make this concise, not just comprehensive? It's almost like the Occam's razor thing, right? It's like, what's the most simple way to get the result that you're looking for and not just making things complicated because it makes it sound smart. And I'm not saying that you're doing that on purpose, but I know that if you're someone who's got a more formalized education, maybe you got advanced degrees, you got a PhD or a master's degree, you might have been trained to over explain or explain in a way that's very academic, and that's not necessarily going to have the same impact as if you explain for results and for transformation. So with all of that, if you want to be inspired by somebody who is super smart, thinks deeply, sees a lot of nuance, and still is able to have a very successful online business, I would love for you to listen to my client Chris Sandal's story. So Chris has been in his business about as long as I have, over 15 years. We actually have known each other for almost that entire time, just from the health space and then obviously now in the business space. But he is somebody who has this incredible deep expertise around eating disorder recovery specifically. He also is a big long form content guy. He loves blogging, podcasting. Like, he just loves to put out a lot of content. And that's awesome. It's something that really sets him apart. It's something that the fact that he has been running his long form podcast for years and years is very unusual and really admirable. Chris's challenge was that he had a hard time explaining and communicating things in a simple enough way for his potential clients to easily say yes to his offers. And if you think about somebody who's in an eating disorder situation, they're not necessarily able to make the most logical decisions. They're malnourished, their brain's probably not functioning at its peak, and they're probably making a lot more emotional decisions than they are making very deeply intellectual decisions. And that's not because people who have eating disorders aren't smart. It's that their brain is getting starved, right? Like, if they're not getting enough calories, their brain's not even able to function at its peak. So if he's asking them to understand this huge diversity of information in order to make a purchasing decision, that can really make people feel nervous and overwhelmed, and they're probably already feeling overwhelmed with the situation they're in. And so even though he was making sales, he wasn't making as many sales as he could. And he was really struggling, especially to sell his group program, because he was trying to explain why they should want a group program and they weren't buying it. So he decided that he was going to simplify his messaging. That's something that I helped him with, is really taking this very diverse, broad knowledge set and pulling out the core things that somebody needs to know in order to enroll with him in his program. And he also started testing his messaging especially the short form messaging. So again, he was really big into podcasting, blogging. He still is, but he wanted to try to show up on social media in a way that could also reach new people and also in a way that aligned with his personality. So he started testing a specific strategy for content creation that has just fully taken off for him. It's amazing. When I talked to him on the podcast, he was getting over 2 million Instagram views a month. He doubled his revenue in a single year. And now he's able to put out really effective social media content that complements his long form and also sells his program for him. So I just love this story. If you are a strategic CEO, you will absolutely find a lot of common ground with Chris as far as the kind of things that he was trying for his business, the things that he didn't like, the things that he liked, and how he really is using his strengths and his intelligence to make a much more successful business that allows him to have the life he wants to have. So I would love for you to listen to Chris's interview to just be inspired by what's possible when you take your brilliance and you simplify it down into something that actually creates sales and facilitates transformations for people. All of that to say, I want you to remember your intellectual depth and rigor is rare and genuinely valuable. So don't feel like you're at a disadvantage or that things are harder for you, because I know sometimes when you're really smart, you can feel like, man, I almost wish I wasn't as smart because things would probably be easier for me. I wouldn't see all the complexity and the nuance and I could just post something and not worry about it. But that's not you, right? And let's make sure that you're building your business in a way that expands on your brilliance and doesn't make you feel like you have to dim it. So if you haven't taken the CEO quiz already, take it. I want to make sure this is an accurate typing for you. And if you have taken it and you did get the strategic CEO result, check out the strategic CEO results page for your full game plan with everything that we talked about today and just the things that you're going to focus on to help make sure that your business is optimized for making sales and getting clients and having the impact that you want to have. If you have friends in the industry and you think maybe they're a strategic CEO and you're like, I think you need a little kick in the butt to simplify things and put it out there and not overthink things, then please share the quiz with them. Obviously, depending on the type of result they get will impact the specific game plan that they get. But I really hope that this series has been something that helps everybody see the strengths that they have and doesn't look at their blind spots as some sort of weakness that's going to prevent them from being successful. You are so smart and so capable, and all you need to do is turn that brilliance into something that has the biggest impact possible. And a lot of times, all that means is simplifying and streamlining the stuff that you're already excellent at. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you feel inspired to go make your brilliance real in the 3D world, to have the impact that you are so qualified to have. And I hope that you'll stick around for future episodes to go deeper on how to show up as an expert online, get the right clients, get the attention that you deserve as somebody who really knows what they're doing, and to be able to do it all in a way that feels really ethical and aligned with who you are. All right, well, that's it for me. I'll see you here next time on the Nourished CEO podcast. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nourished CEO podcast. And if this episode got you thinking about how you're actually wired to run your business, your next step is to take the CEO type quiz. Because here's the thing. Most of the business advice out there was built for someone specific. And if that someone isn't you, it doesn't matter how hard you work or how many strategies you implement. It's just never going to feel right, and it's never going to work as well as it should. Knowing your CEO type changes all of that. After you take the quiz, your results page will walk you through your natural strengths, your biggest blind spots, and a concrete game plan for your offers, messaging, sales, and even your calendar, all built around how you actually think and lead. Not generic advice, your specific direction. It takes about 5 minutes and it's completely free. The link is in the show notes, or you can go to lauraschoenfeld.com/quiz. And if you already know your type and this episode resonated with you, share the quiz with someone else who needs it. The right framework at the right time can completely change how someone sees their business. And honestly, that's exactly why I made this. All right, I'll see you next time on the Nourished CEO podcast.